The year is 1999, and the world was introduced to the magical world of Pokemon in a new and exciting way. Professor Oak needs your help. Professor Oak has asked you to capture the wild Pokemon of Pokemon Island on film. Tour the island in your 01 vehicle and snap pictures of Pokemon in their natural habitats. Wild Pokemon are often camera shy, so you'll have to use special items to bring them out in the open. Only the best shots will do for the Professor's Pokemon Report, so sharpen your photography skills and get ready to snap. Hello everyone, and thank you for coming to my channel. My name is Lane, and today we're going to be exploring the timeline of the Pokemon Snap series and seeing where that falls in the overall Pokemon timeline. So with that, let's get started. In Pokemon Snap, the renowned Professor Oak, is researching Pokemon on Pokemon Island and invites a young photographer, Todd Snap, to the island to go ahead and film the Pokemon living on the island. The island is solely home to Pokemon, making it the ideal location to study them in their natural habitats. Now, instead of capturing Pokemon like in a normal Pokemon game, the idea here is to explore the island and to take photos of the Pokemon, capture them in another sense. Todd's travel is limited to the tracks placed for the 01's machine to actually navigate the island. So he can't wander off. It's not really an open world experience. It's more of a timed travel experience. He also has different tools at his disposal, such as his camera, apple-shaped Pokemon food, pester balls, and the Poke Flute to wake up sleeping Pokemon. Now, as Todd progresses his journey through the Pokemon Island, he's able to upgrade his cart, he's able to upgrade his arsenal of tools. A sequel, New Pokemon Snap, was released for the Nintendo Switch on April 30th, 2021. In this game, Professor Mirror tasks the player with photographing Pokemon in their natural habitats across the Lintel region, an archipelago known for its diverse ecosystems. The professor and his assistant Rita guide the player through the islands and share details about the research team's ecological survey. Phil, a newcomer to Lintel who has a competitive rivalry with the player, also joins the research team. At the start of the game, the player is invited by Professor Mirror and Rita to the Laboratory of Ecology Natural Sciences in the Lintel region to conduct a survey of the Illumina Pokémon that have been recorded in the travelogue written by Captain Vince. Like in Pokemon Island, the Neo 1, the upgraded version of the 01, follows a set path through the island, but in this case you're able to diverge off the path and go a different direction, which opens up more of the islands to the player to explore. Fluff Fruit can be used to grab the attention of nearby Pokemon, while Illumina Orbs, developed by Professor Mirror and linked to the unique Illumina Pokemon in the Lintel region, can trigger special effects. For example, they can turn the color of fire emitted from certain Pokemon from red to blue. Pretty cool. The player can also use a melody to draw a Pokemon, and as courses are studied, the research level increases, which leads to Pokemon displaying new behaviors and expressions. Alright, so now looking at the timeline of these two games, we do know that Pokemon Snap happens before Pokemon New Snap. Why? Because you can't have a new version of something if the old one never existed. But no, looking at more of the research, the player character from the original Pokemon Snap, Todd Snap, actually occurs as a reoccurring character in Pokemon New Snap. And he's visibly aged, like a lot. He's no longer a kid. Todd is actually a professional photographer now and is actually the role model of your rival, Phil. Todd has also had a major hand in upgrading of the 01 machine into the Neo 1, which is the machine that you travel through New Pokemon Snap with. So, with all this evidence, we can definitely tell that New Pokemon Snap is the direct sequel to Pokemon Snap. Now, of course, where do these games take place in the overall Pokemon timeline? So, in case you didn't remember or don't remember, here's our current Pokemon timeline. And now let's get into the evidence of where I think that these games fall. Alright, so for this, we look at the only two humans that we see in the initial Pokemon Snap game. That, of course, being Todd Snap and Professor Oak. Professor Oak only appears in so many games in our timeline, and sadly, people don't live forever. And he's already a grandpa, so yeah. So that means that since he only appears in these games, we need to focus in and place it somewhere in this section, in the earlier part of our timeline. After that, it does get a bit more difficult to place. We also know that Professor Oak is the driving force that sends Todd to Pokemon Island to survey the area. Todd's entire goal is to fill up the Pokémon Report full of photos of the Pokemon inhabiting the many areas of this island. Now, other than your mom, what other item do we try to fill up in the Pokemon games that is heavily influenced by Professor Oak? The Pokédex, of course. I think that the Pokémon Report is actually a beta version or initial version of the Pokédex. I mean, if you think about it, there is no way for the Pokédex to hold photos of Pokemon, so maybe that's why Todd was sent to collect them, just on a smaller scale given that there are only 63 Pokemon. If that is the case, this would place the events of the initial Pokémon Snap sometime before the initial Kanto games. This also makes sense because of the Slowpoke Pokédex entry. It mentions its weird evolution mechanic, and this is never seen in-game, but is seen in Pokémon Snap. The only time it's ever seen in a game. They had to get this information from somewhere. So I feel like it makes sense that maybe they got it from Todd's Pokémon Report. But it can't happen too long before the initial Kanto games because there are two man-made Pokemon that are actually appearing there. We have Porygon, which I love Porygon, you guys know that, and then we also have Mewtwo appearing on a sign. So both of these Pokemon have had to have been created for them to appear here. So I'm gonna place the initial Pokemon Snap game almost directly before the Kanto games, right here. I'm also going to go ahead and put that the new Pokemon Snap, the Pokédex, is practically a Pokédex. Like, it has entries and information and everything. So this is almost like a theory. It's almost confirmed. It's not almost a theory, it is a theory. It's almost a fact. Now, looking at new Pokemon Snap, it's a lot harder to place, and there's more speculation that has to go into this one. Looking through the Pokédex, there are no Pokemon with timestamps on them, and I'm not going to say that Pokemon introduced during a certain generation dictate whether or not this takes place before or after. Like, just because there's a Pokemon that doesn't exist in one spot doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in the world. Like, I don't have pandas where I live in Ohio, but pandas still exist, you know what I mean? So the only Pokemon that could potentially help us with this would be Xerneas. Xerneas is one of the Illumina Pokémon, a group of Pokémon that saved the region from a meteorite 2,000 years ago. It is also believed to be the originator of the Illumina phenomena, and the very first Illumina Pokémon. And we do know from its Pokédex entries that it slept for 1,000 years before the events of X and Y, in the form of a tree. Now, I am going to go off the assumption here that there's one of each legendary Pokemon. So, like, there's only going to be one giver of life, Xerneas. Not two. We're not counting mega dimensions. We're not counting ultra space wormholes. We're not counting Snacksworth for some reason. We are just going to say there's one, and that's it, for the sake of this theory. So for Xerneas, the bringer of life, to be here now, it needed to have been awoken in X and Y. So if that is the case, we do know that new Pokemon Snap can happen at any point after X and Y in our timeline. Now, this huge jump is also supported by character growth. The player of Todd Snap is a child in the original games, but is now an adult, having visibly aged. But we don't know how much time has passed here. If we could only compare this character to someone who else has visibly aged from around the same time frame. Maybe some protagonists that appear in Red and Blue. Yeah, we have Red and Blue, the characters from the original Kanto games who we are able to see again in the Alola games, which, according to my timeline, is about a 20-year difference. So, if we compare their first appearances with Todd's to the later appearances in the series, which is Sun and Moon for Red and Blue and new Pokemon Snap for Todd, we can see that they have aged pretty similarly. So, in my opinion, we can place new Pokemon Snap around the same time as the Alola games. I personally am going to place it directly before them, just because I know it's more of like a graphics thing, but Todd looks younger, in my opinion. So I'm going to place it before, not at the same time. So I feel like this is a good continuing story for Xerneas as well. Like, it left the Kalos region after the event, and then it made it all the way to the Lental region, and was able to reinvigorate the Illumina phenomenon. I can't say that word, so. But this is kind of like a continuing story for Xerneas, and I think that that's pretty cool. Alright, you guys, thank you so much for coming to this timeline video again. Here's going to be what our current timeline looks like, including the Pokemon Snap games. And perfect. Let me know what you guys think if you enjoyed this video. Comment, like, subscribe, all the fun YouTube stuff. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!